What's up, fuckers? It's your boy, the Billy Ocean of fighting Sakuraba while smothered in lotion, Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you ahead of UFC 253, Adesanya versus Costa. It's going to be a banger. I made a Filthy Casuals guide. Go watch that. If you're not already subscribed and belled, I hate doing this, but people were saying that they like. People were being like, "Oh my god, Jack Slack's back! What, I haven't seen you in forever." And I'm like, "Well, you're subscribed to me. Why do you not see that?" So yeah, if you're not subscribed and belled, click that bell. Bell end. I haven't called anyone a bell end on this podcast in forever. James Vick, bell end. Actually does look like a large floppy penis. But before we talk about the fights, I suppose we've got to talk about the hugest piece of news that broke last week about an hour after I released the pod. Yeah, good old Michael Chandler actually is coming to the UFC, which is just the funniest kick in the teeth. I don't know. I mean, I'm happy. That's great. I want more. It annoys me when there's world-class fighters who I cannot actually see against other world-class fighters. You know, there wasn't a lot he could be doing in Bellator. He just finished Benson Henderson, who, again, like past the zenith of his career by quite a long way now. They could have done the Pitbull rematch, but Pitbull's already doing the featherweight tournament. So yeah, it's really quite good that he's coming to the UFC. Now we have to consider, is he actually the worst matchup for Khabib, though? Because that would be a mindfuck. I mean, there's interesting things about him versus Khabib, but the one thing that I keep coming back to when I'm thinking about Michael Chandler in bed at night is that when he's not throwing 1-2s, and to be fair, he added like a southpaw stance to his game in his last fight and caught Benson Henderson off guard that way. But when he's not throwing fast right hands, he's taking people down and laying on them. You know, if you watch his fights with Brent Primus, Goti Yamauchi, there is a lot of just like get on top, push him to the fence, hump. You know, it's it'll be interesting to see what he can do against like world-class fighters who can actually keep themselves off the cage or use the cage to get back up. I suppose him versus Tony would be good fun. They're talking about getting him because he's lined up as the replacement for if Gaethje or Khabib get injured, which is hilarious. That is how you work your way into a title shot without really earning it. Will Brooks at home kicking himself right now. But yeah, him versus Gaethje would be a banger. Him versus Khabib would at least be interesting. I think, like, a fun fight-wise, I'd like to put him in against someone like Charles Oliveira. You know, someone who's very exciting from the bottom, but still liable to be taken down. Has been stopped with ground and pound and by being mauled in the clinch along the fence and things. Yeah, I mean, that's where I'd put him if I was slotting him in. I wouldn't be slotting him in at title level, but that's just me. However, I'm not going to beat myself up too bad about him actually coming to the UFC after me laughing at him for so long, because he had already done this 3 previous times and then just re-signed with Bellator. And I believe my bullying actually made him decide to come to the UFC. Just as my bullying the other week made Michelle Waterson a better fighter. And we're going to be talking a lot about bullying today because we're talking about Paulo Costa. So let's talk about that main event. Not going to lie, pretty excited for this fight. Lots going on. I mean, it's not the best... I don't know if Paulo Costa's the biggest test for Israel Adesanya or anything like that, but I think he's an interesting style matchup. And I think he also guarantees an interesting fight because, you know, we watched him against like Yoel Romero. The dude is absolutely fearless. And I think that's part of the thing with the accusations of being a bully, because there are fighters who are bullies, and then the moment that they get hit hard, they go, uh-oh, take a step back, and then suddenly they're not fighting that effective pressure fighting game anymore. Bullying is essentially pressure fighting, but not being willing to take what's coming back. Whereas Paulo Costa, if you watch him, he goes forward from the opening bell, he makes stuff happen, is good to his word in that regard, and he gets blasted in the face, just gets up and keeps going forward. So yeah, he provides an interesting fight in that he could tire Adesanya out, particularly with his body work and his low kicks, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But his pace, his ability to take a shot, combined with his inability to defend his head, or he could get knocked out doing it because he's just going to keep walking on. And honestly, I fucking love his style. I think it's one of the most entertaining styles in MMA today. And I really wish we had more pressure fighters doing this. You know, not necessarily getting hit as much as he does, but using the round kick to enter with punches and then hit the body. You know, that should be... I think everyone in every gym in the MMA world should be working on how to cut the ring with round kicks at some point, during their camp. Maybe that's not your style, but at some point you're going to need to get someone to stop running. If you ever hurt someone, and they start running, you're going to need to be able to cut them off. Is Paulo Costa the best ring cutter in MMA? Probably not. He's a bit, as I pointed out in the Filthy Casuals Guide, massive flaws if guys start going to his left. And that's particularly noticeable against orthodox fighters because he's fought an awful lot of southpaws where you can start sliding down the outside of their lead leg and placing himself closer to the fence on his left side, like Roy Nelson used to do, so that guys run out towards the your right side, that is, you, the ring cutter, and you hit him with, if you're Roy Nelson, like a straight-armed swing, but if you're Paulo Costa, the right kick to the body or the head, normally the body, and sometimes he hits guys in the body, but when you're using the right round kick like that, you're aiming to hit the arm. Well, you're not aiming to hit the arm, you're aiming to hit whatever you can, but you normally hit the arm, but you then have them standing still, and you come in with punches afterwards. If you watch him against McLennan, was it McLennan? Gareth something or other, or Johnny Hendricks, or Bang Bose. I mean, he did the same to Yoel Romero, which is, Yoel Romero was sort of letting himself go onto the fence, but it served the same purpose. When Yoel Romero wanted to circle off the fence, he'd hit him with the right round kick and then come in with punches afterwards. And the crazy, crazy thing about Paulo Costa is that I remember watching him come up through the cards and I was like, oh, okay, cool, this guy's exciting, come out of Brazil, super prospect, whatever. And I knew he'd been on The Ultimate Fighter Brazil, but I assumed it was straight from one to the other. I didn't realise, because, these things just whiz by in your head, it had been a few years since he was on Tough Brazil. So I went back and watched his Tough Brazil fights, and he is dog shit. Because he's a guy who came in, I believe his style was listed as bodybuilding. He was in bodybuilding and then he wanted to fight. But what he does is he just charges after guys, takes them down, gets on top, gasses out, and that's nothing like what he is today. Because someone pointed out to me that Paulo Costa's attempted 0 takedowns in the UFC. I mean, he has on Tough Brazil, he took people down, but he hasn't done that since he got to the UFC. Because he went back to Jungle Fight and what's the other one? Other Brazilian fight promotion. But if you can watch, you can find really, really bad quality footage of that on YouTube. Some guy just filmed his TV on his phone. And if you watch those fights, you really see that rapid improvement. He has learned to strike effectively in a very short space of time. And, the guy's never been wanting for strength. And there is a difference between strength and power. And it gets into this sort of weird mumbo-jumbo-y area where we start talking about snap-on punches. Because you can watch Paulo Costa punch and you go, damn, that's a strong guy punching. But he's not always got the same sort of clean snappiness that you see on McGregor's favourite left straight, when he does the pullback and the left hand over the top. Or, think of a really good knockout punch that you see quite a lot in MMA. Tends to have that snapping power on it. Whereas Paulo Costa sort of clubs people. That's not to say it doesn't work. It reminds me a lot of George Foreman. He was almost an arm puncher at many points, but still knocked people out and beat people up. And honestly, when you watch George Foreman in the 70s, and this was something that Muhammad Ali got really mad about in Zaire, he'd start ranting at the press about how George Foreman's built this amazing puncher. But he's like, who's he knocking out? He's hitting them and then pushing them over. He just sort of overwhelmed people. He wasn't getting these clean knockouts. Whereas if you watched Ali's knockouts, they were fewer and further between, but he'd catch guys leaning in and they'd fall on their face, and it'd be a very spectacular sort of knockout. Whereas George Foreman was just sort of scary. But obviously George Foreman in his older years started landing many more clean blows. And there was a lot of wildness in young Foreman that just sort of disappeared when he was 40 years old. But it's the idea of a clubbing hitter versus a snappy hitter. But a clubbing hitter can still fuck you up. If you watch his fight with Yoel Romero, I think he dropped Yoel Romero twice with left hooks, with short left hooks. And I was really quite pleased with that, because a lot of people saw that Romero fight as hey, look, clearly Paulo Costa's not unstoppable. But I think I saw more from Paulo Costa in moments of that Romero fight than I did up to that point, because he fought a lot of not great opponents. Had a lot of trouble with Uriah Hall. But in that Romero fight, he does... I spoke about this in the Filthy Casuals Guide. There's a lot that didn't get into the Filthy Casuals Guide because I've been saying I'm doing it for ages, and then it got to the time to put it together, and I was like, fuck, this is gonna be over deadline, so I had to cut some stuff. But I think I briefly mentioned it, but if you have your opponent's back to the fence and if they're between you and the fence, like good ring cutting, the Paulo Costa position, they're often pulled up out of their stance. They have their feet close together. They can't hit as well from that position. That's just something that happens, especially if you start shellacking their arms with round kicks. They'll just get dragged up out of their stance and be standing upright. And, even good ring generals will leave their stance to side skip because it makes them more mobile. They just can't hit as well. You're making the decision to do that. But if you're the guy with your back to the center of the cage and you've got your opponent on the cage, you always have your back foot to drop away on. You can retreat away. You can pull your head back, lean back into your stance. They don't have that if they're getting crunched up near the fence. But a few times through that fight, particularly in between, once he'd landed a big flurry and not put your Romero away, Costa would lean back into his stance, let Romero slap at him off the fence and clack him with the left hook. He has this quite nice lean back left hook. And there was one he caught Romero over the back of the head with like a clubbing forearm on this left hook. And Romero just fell into the takedown attempt because he got sort of wobbled by it. And there was another one where he did hurt him. And that was the one right at the beginning where Romero jumps up and hurts Costa as he's swarming. And that's, the other side of this. Costa does open him. He's there. He's using his presence to create pressure, to force exchanges, to run this rampant pace. But you can't be elusive and create pressure at the same time. It doesn't work. So he's always there to hit. And I think that's quite interesting because obviously your Romero was doing cover-ups and returns. I think it'd be very interesting to see what Izzy can do, because a lot of Izzy's best blows have been as guys are walking onto him. Poor old Rob Whittaker fought the worst fight imaginable against Israel Adesanya. Didn't wrestle, didn't hit the body, didn't hit the head, didn't target anything. Sorry, didn't hit the body, didn't hit the legs, didn't target anything that wasn't the head. Just a terrible, terrible game plan, and ran himself onto check hooks and shit. But it's something we always talk about, like guys who aren't known as big hitters, because Izzy's a good finisher but not necessarily a huge hitter, become much better hitters if they can walk you onto their punches. Great clip of Chris Eubank talking about Harold Graham doing that to some lad. Just YouTube Chris Eubank, Harold Graham. Harold Graham, the bomber, but he couldn't punch for toffee. Kind of like Brad One Punch Pickett. That was sort of like a misnomer. The incredibly deadly Viper. But talking strats, obviously, Israel Adesanya is going to do his best to stay off the fence. If he does get pushed to the fence, he's got options. Direction changes, very important. Get guys to overcommit. If you're fighting Paulo Costa, you know exactly what he wants to do. He's pretty useless if you circle to his left. He'll throw like a big wheel kick or something. I've never seen him come close to landing it. It has a good left hook, but again, stands quite bladed, so doesn't have much of an option to do that. He can't catch you as you go far out. He can only catch you if you're coming back from his right. But that being said, if he's getting closer and closer, circle to his right, because he wants to throw the right kick. Circle until he starts to throw it and then circle back the other way. I also think the double collar tie could be very useful here. It's something that it is a battle. You can use the double collar tie against good body hitters. And people who want to smother on the fence, but good body hitters can also hit your body while you're using double collar tie. So there's lots of different matchups where that's gone different ways, like Andrade versus Hill, Nick Diaz versus various people. Fabio Maldonado used to do great body work from inside the double collar tie. But if you're using the double collar tie well from the fence, like Demetrius Johnson, Fabricio Verdum, you're using it to turn off the fence more than you're just trying to hold or stall the other guy out. I think that could be a really useful weapon for Israel Adesanya, especially as these two are similar heights. A lot of the people that Paulo Costa fights are shorter than him. So if you watch him against Bang Bose, who, Jesus Christ, that fight is hilarious. Bang Bose just fought like a utter loon. But Costa would trap him along the fence, hit his body, and then the Bang Bus would start covering up and crunching over to try and defend his body while he was also covering his head. I mean, that's I'm going to say genius of hitting the body along the fence, but it's not genius. It's just, it's the bare minimum you expect, but nobody does it. but basically, you are giving someone, all the good dilemmas in fighting are, stop me doing this. If you don't, I'm going to keep doing it. If you do, I'll do something different, and then I'll go back to the first thing. That's the science of boxing or fighting generally at its most basic. If you aren't going to stop me, I'm going to do it. If you do stop me, I'll change it so that you have to do something else. Because Costa could have done just as well as someone like Rumble Johnson by swinging wild just for the head. He's done better because he gets guys covering up and then he hits the body hard, and then they start making big mistakes, like bending over to try and cover their whole body and head with their arms, and then he just grabs the double collar tie, knees him in the body, knees him in the head, hits him with an elbow on the break. If Johnny Walker were not shit, he'd look like Paulo Costa. If Johnny Walker could operate the same game plan as Paulo Costa, he'd be a monster because he hits well, he overwhelms people, he scares people, he does best when people are worrying, and pressure does that. And Paulo Costa, most of his success is not through being overwhelmingly powerful. That's just what distracts opponents, worries them, scares them. It's his constant pressure and the bodywork, which is, brilliant to see. Doesn't kick the legs as much as perhaps he should, but that is something that I'm going to say should be a huge part of his game in this one. Israel Adesanya, great at pulling his head back, great at leaving range, framing off the opponent. If you watch him against Whittaker, he doesn't frame an awful lot in that one, but he does pull back and leave range. What he does is he tends to take one step back and then off to the side, or he takes an actual step out of his stance off to the side. So he'll change from southpaw to orthodox or orthodox to southpaw. Now, if you remember, go read Absolute Masterclass Cruz versus Garbrandt, and we'll talk more about Cruz's bounces back into the launch pad, as I call it. But Dominic Cruz is another one who used to leave range by taking it a full step, shifting back. Henry Cejudo, you should be watching his fight with Dominic Cruz for how Paulo Costa should be dealing with Israel Adesanya's movement in this fight. Cejudo would move in, Cruz would take a full step back, and then Cejudo would kick the leg that was now out in front instead of the one that he appeared to be targeting in the first place. You kick the trailing leg. Now, if you are good at moving away from blows and keeping your head out of range and stuff like that, whether you're very upright like Machida or you're leaning back like Israel Adesanya, the last thing to leave range is your feet, whatever foot you're pushing off of. So whether you're stepping back or you're shuffling back, there is always going to be a leg that comes out of range last. So it's not just a case of like, how do you slow someone down, which is what kicking the legs will do. It's a case of, it's the thing that's there, fucking kick it. Think Machida versus Shogun 1. He'd pump his hands just to get Machida running. He wasn't ever really going to catch Machida because Machida had this nice long distance. Every time Shogun came in, he was going to move out of the way. But he'd pump his hands, Machida would run, he'd kick him in the leg, and the leg would be the last thing to leave. And he'd miss the leg a lot too, but when he hit the leg, it was worth it. Because when you're leaving range like that and you're using the more you use your feet, the less you're in position to check kicks. It's just a general rule. Like, the more you are mobile and moving laterally and moving in and out, the more you're relying on your feet being down in position. There's an awful lot of timing going on there with your footwork. You're pushing off one foot, pushing off the other. It's a lot more complicated to try and check kicks or withdraw your lead leg and make a kick miss if you are trying to move at the same time. And showing the punches first does that. But the other one is like along the fence, guys, good guys like Izzy, Dominic Cruz, Eddie Alvarez, people like that, they flatten their stance out and they side skip. And the way to deal with that is to kick the trailing leg. Now, I watched Paulo Costa struggle to get a hold of the bang bus when he was like skipping around the ring like a madman. But I did also watch him land a good inside low kick to the rear, not the rear leg, but the trailing leg as he was skipping around, and that was encouraging. I think it helps that Henry Cejudo is a teammate of Paulo Costa and they're training together, and they both have that Eric Alvarez. I can never say his name. Eric Alvarez. I've had to be quite careful this fight because I'm a sarky bastard. But Israel Adesanya and Eric Alvarez like to chime in on my Facebook and my Twitter. So not too many gags made about how incredibly gay this fight is for a start. But not that that's wrong. I mean, I think it's pretty dope how attracted these guys clearly are to themselves and each other. But that Eric Alvarez connection, really encouraging. The Henry Cejudo connection, really encouraging. Anytime you're dealing with someone who moves a lot, feet, or rather legs, attack the legs. Because if you can even get them standing more upright and still ready to check or withdraw their leg, you've changed their movement. Even if they don't think you have, you have. And if they don't bother checking or changing anything, you just keep trying to kick their leg until it falls off. But the other one, of course, is lean backs, pull-aways, things like that. Anyone who does that a lot, you can start to back them up with double jabs and feints. Don't expect a whole heap of double jabbing from Costa. But from Anderson Silva to, Randy Turpin to anyone who's been famous for pulling back, the key is to get him pulling back too soon. You pull back and then there's not a lot further you can go. And if you get caught leaning back, you've got a great chance of being knocked down just because your feet won't catch you. Doing that Anderson Silva limbo stuff. For Adesanya, I think like the double collar tie along the fence, I think elbows, maybe not knees, but elbows, great shout coming in because Paulo Costa does not protect his face very well. Sometimes he does, other times he doesn't. It's very strange. The jab, obviously a key weapon for Israel Adesanya in the kickboxing ring, which is very strange because you don't see a lot of great jabbers for jabbing's sake in the kickboxing ring. Like Ramon Dekker's had a great jab, but he'd like fire it into your chest to get your weight off your lead leg and then kick it. But you don't see a lot of hands down bladed stance jabbers in kickboxing, and that's what made Israel so interesting in the kickboxing ring. Uriah Hall had amazing success just pumping the jab. It was the bestest jab it ever looked, but I think that was largely due to Paulo Costa, and he got Paulo Costa reaching and trying to play double hand traps and stuff. Obviously, Uriah Hall has a ridiculous reach for his height, but Izzy's reach isn't bad for his height, and his jab's probably better than Uriah Hall's. I'm quite interested to see if wrestling can be brought to Lever in this fight, because Costa, strong dude, early fights are lots of takedowns and things like that, but he hasn't been doing it lately. But again, been working with Cejudo, Eric Albarracin, good wrestlers, good wrestling coaches. It would be very interesting to see if he can at least use the clinch in some kind of offensive capacity. It's a great fight. Like, I can't complain. I think it's kind of, you got a very obvious contrast in the styles, but also I think like you so rarely get those good ring cutter versus ring, runner, ring general, whatever you want to call it, matchups in MMA. I think it's probably because ring cutting in MMA is pretty low level still. I mean, it's very hard to cut a cage for a start. If you want proof of that, watch Rod Tang work over Haggerty in his second fight with Haggerty, and how Haggerty just couldn't keep him off him. And then watch the two fights previous to that Rod Tang had in the cage, where he just sucked. Like, he couldn't keep up with the dude at all. The dude was just running around him. And you can have the arguments about, like, Muay Thai scoring is one real Muay Thai scoring, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, Rod Tang is great at forcing engagements in the ring, and he wasn't in the cage. The difference in the angles of the corners is a big deal. A lot easier to get trapped in a 90-degree corner than in a, I don't know, is it 45? Double the number of sides, so, fuck. I'm just going to cut it off there because I don't know. But, the angles are much less severe on the corners. But more than that, like, there are so few good defensive ring generals because there are so few good ring cutters in MMA. So you can, like, I always point this example out, but, like, when Ronda Rousey was, when I was writing that Killing the Queen, some amazing retard put up this thread just breaking down how I was wrong about everything and blah, blah, blah. And basically the point was ringcraft or defensive ringcraft and ring circling and cutting off the line of attack and so on won't work on Ronda Rousey because everyone else, she's managed to clinch everyone else or whatever it was, and then you're like, no, look at the footage of the other people she clinched. They ran straight back onto the fence. And then, lo and behold, Holly Holm comes out, moves laterally. Ronda Rousey just chases her and can't successfully cut off the ring. And before that, you'd have been like, yeah, Ronda Rousey always gets the clinch, must be a good ring cutter. You don't really know the level of someone's ring cutting until you see them against someone who actually knows how to deal with that. An amazing example would be, I think I reference this one a lot, but Hector Camacho was hard to hit with a handful of rice. Very, very slick, could turn circles around people. There are great clips of him ducking out behind people and hitting them from behind in the boxing ring. Fought Julio Cesar Chavez, and Julio Cesar Chavez, like, Camacho was all talk leading up to that fight. There was a lot of, like, smack talk and silliness, and it was very heated, very highly anticipated fight. And Julio Cesar Chavez was calm as you like. Like, he just walked him down, and every direction change, turn, feint, anything that Camacho did, Chavez either didn't overcommit, just sort of like let him go with it and then caught up to him a little bit, or he'd go, oh, he's out, okay, well, I'll just cut the ring again then. And that's good ring cutting. Like, you try not to overcommit. If you lose it, you go, cool, I'll just do it again. And that's exhausting. If it's taking you two slick direction changes to get out, that's you're side skipping. That's quite hard work. and you're also under pressure the entire time mentally because the guy closing in on you, he's about to try and beat you up. That fight is beautiful. Go watch that fight. But that is true, very good ring general versus very good ring cutter. And you don't get that in MMA. Yet. We've gotten away from talking about ringcraft a bit in recent years because, it's just not come up in as many obvious ways as in this matchup. But that's the future. Like, being able to dictate where things happen in the ring is the most important thing in MMA, or will be the most important thing in MMA at some point. Soon, hopefully. Anyway, let's look down the rest of this card. Diego Sanchez is fighting Jake Matthews. That's a strange one, but Jake Matthews came in with a lot of hype. Well, certainly I was hyped for him when I first saw him. He was a very promising guy, and then he just hasn't sort of reached it yet. Hasn't sort of realised his potential. Rebounded from a loss to Rocco Martin in 2018. Beat Emil Weber-Meek in February, who I'm stunned to learn was still in the UFC. And I think that was the one where he was elbowed in the back of the head 1,000. Oh no, that was a different Emil Weber-Meek fight. But I quite like that. It's not too bad because Matthews not a huge hitter, not an amazing striker, like a passable striker, but certainly not someone who's just going to murder Diego Sanchez on the feet. Much more of a grappler, and obviously Diego Sanchez can still have good grappling matches with people. I don't want to give too much time to the Diego Sanchez-Joshua Fabia thing because we've all done that, we've all laughed. At this point, you're laughing at a very gullible, possibly mentally ill man being taken advantage of by, essentially what looks to be becoming a weird martial arts cult. And I think I saw Stephan Bonner was getting involved in it too. So, very concerning. But, Diego Sanchez is, for better or worse, still a name that people will tune in for. Hakeem Dawodo's back. Always good fun. Had his UFC debut ruined back in 2018 by Danny Henry. Very quick submission. Well, I think Danny Henry hit him and hurt him and then submitted him with the guillotine, didn't he? It was very surprising. I think Dawodo was a big favourite in that one. But since then, he's been great. Beat Austin Arnett, beat Kyle Bochniak, knocked out Yoshinori Horii. Great name. And I think that the Julio Ask one, he got a split decision, but I seem to remember him doing better than that. I personally didn't score it a split decision. My favourite thing in the world. I scored it a split decision. Now, I think that was the one where he was using cut kicks underneath Ars's head kicks, which were great. I love the name Julio Ars. There was an even better. Julio Ars was in a fight with someone who got knocked down and went inverted and used his arse and hamstrings to defend his head. I hope it was Arse that did that, actually. That would be great. The Arse guard. But yeah, Dawodo, fun guy. He's fighting Zubaira Tukhugov. I hate that I now have to be a Russian language student to cover MMA. But they did warn me about this years ago. The Russians are coming. But Tukhugov lost a decision to Moicano back in 2016. Had a couple of cancelled fights. Coming off this win over Kevin Aguilar back in February. So yeah, good fight. But guy on a 1-1-1 streak versus guy on a 4-fight winning streak. Not seeing anything that was cancelled here, but fair enough. Brad Riddell's on the card. Everyone loves Brad Riddell. Very messy. People were asking me to do stuff on him, and I was like, he's just very messy. Does some cool stuff. Like, there was one against Mustayev. The bit of offense that I credit him for, because half the fight was just Mustayev spinning, missing, falling over, and then Brad Riddell going, I'm having that, and going into top position. But when he did knock him down very early, it was a little thing that reminded me of something that Prince Nazim used to do, which was he would step in with his lead leg a little bit, turn his shoulder and turn his rear hand down with the wrist, and then he would loop it to throw a right straight, and then he would loop his hand low and come round in a hook. If you watched the punch he dropped Kevin Kelly with, there was another lad, I think he was from Puerto Rico. I've been talking about doing some Prince Nazim stuff for a while now, but it's just like you fake the right straight and then there's a little beat and you come round the side with the right hook. And Prince Nazim used to catch guys with that all the time. And Riddell seemed to catch Mustayev with that. There was also that brilliant fight with Malarkey, who he battered. And he punched him on the knees. Like they were both on their knees and he hit him in the chin. It was fantastic. But yeah, Brad Riddell, interesting fighter. I don't think he's got the same potential as some of those city kickboxing boys, but definitely worth tuning in for. He's the Kiwi Lando Venata, basically. I saw that Sijara Eubanks is taking another like short notice fight, or rather a fight like 2 weeks after her last one. But I didn't realize she was fighting Ketlin Vieira, who, if you remember, she was pretty hot shit. Actually, people were very excited about her. Strong wrestler in the women's bantamweight division, and then she beat Sarah McMahon, Ashley Evans Smith, Kat Zingano, a bunch of I suppose names in that division, as much as there are. But then she got knocked out by Irene Aldana. And that was 2019, but I think she suffered like a broken jaw or something like that, because she's had like 4 cancelled fights since then. So they've booked this one to get that back together. But she's decent. She's a good wrestler. I enjoyed watching her against Zingano. And Sijara Eubanks' last fight was actually pretty gritty. I went back and watched it because people were like, it wasn't that bad, after having a good laugh about it. You got Kai Kara France versus Brandon Royval. Brandon Royval, really likable dude. Had a great fight. Was he short notice? I can't remember, but he came in against Tim Elliott. Very respectable name. Struggled to keep Elliott off him because Elliott will just smother all over you if you give him a chance. And then submitted him with an arm triangle choke in round 2. And then was like apologising that he wasn't able to strike more. And then he was like, I've got to go back to work tomorrow. And then you're like, oh yeah, that's right. A lot of these guys rely on a bonus that it's not really given out consistently. And if anyone in the main event gets a finish, even if you scored an amazing knockout before that or a submission, they're going to give it to the main event fighter. But Royval, fun guy, glad to have him back. And Kai Kara France, a little bit more potential, I think I see in him than Riddell, in that I think he's a more polished technical striker, a bit more thoughtful, a bit less brawly, and a bit more varied on the feet. Brad Riddell, a lot of what he does is just sort of swanging and banging with his hands. And I think the other thing that I care, and I think the only other thing people care about on that card is Dominic Reyes versus Jan Blachowicz for the vacant UFC light heavyweight championship. John Jones is gone. He's a heavyweight now, allegedly. And yeah, I mean, this is good. You got Dominic Reyes, who was basically the champion waiting anyway because he beat John Jones and lost the decision. And Jan Blachowicz, who really has been waiting for a title shot forever. But then, like, I was listening to Heavy Hands the other day, and they were pointing out that his career turnaround was one of the most, it was almost Mark Hunt-esque. Well, aside from the fact that he had a very successful pre-UFC career, he was very successful in KSW. Was he in M1 as well? No, just KSW. And then he came to the UFC, beat Ilir Latifi in his first fight, and then just it got desperate, like Jimmy Manuwa, Corey Anderson, Alexander Gustafsson, Patrick Cummings all beat him. Though I didn't think he looked bad against Gustafsson, but he did get taken down and controlled by Gustafsson, which was weird. He was doing well in the stand-up, so it was doubly weird. But then, like, Devin Clark, Jared Cannonier, Jimmy Manuwa, Nikita Krylov, all back-to-back beat them. Weird fight with Thiago Santos that he loses. And then Luke Rockhold, Ronaldo Souza, Corey Anderson beat them all back-to-back. Good names. Maybe not Souza at this point in his career. And, again, Souza and Rockhold, both middleweights coming up. But, yeah, I mean, as far as, like, obvious next contenders go, Blachowicz was there if you hadn't got the rematch with Reyes or Santos. But because we now have no John Jones, it makes sense you can slide him straight in. You got 2 of these guys who were due title shots out of the way in one. Brilliant stuff. Blachowicz is weird. I mean, sometimes I like watching him strike, other times I don't. Sometimes he looks awesome. Like, the sneakers he was hitting Luke Rockhold with on the break were lush. But then other times he'll look like absolutely petrified of Thiago Santos, which is, understandable. But like some sloppy ass fights, like that Devin Clark one. Basically, I keep referring to that as the Steven Seagal chokeout because the guy swings at him along the fence and turns his own back and gets choked, standing rear naked. Just shameful. But beat Nikita Krylov. But I suppose, just awkward and sometimes slick in ways that you wouldn't expect. I mean, he just knocked out Corey Anderson, so confirming that there aren't levels to this at all. But, I don't really know what to make of this fight. I suppose I'm excited for it, as far as I can be for a light heavyweight fight. I'd say for Reyes, my one thing I would say is that Reyes should shave his fucking head, because I said it in the John Jones fight, but he has one of the worst hairlines and comb-overs in the UFC. And that looks really bad to the judges. If you come out for round 4 and your hair looks like it's falling off, you look knackered and just completely done, even though you're not. that affects these judges. Hair is an important part of the fight game, and I can't believe people aren't listening to me yet. Anyway, should be some good ones. Really only care about the car crash that could be Costa versus Adesanya. Not an amazing card up and down, to be honest, but plenty to talk about when we get back on Monday, I'm sure. If the main event's good, I'll probably write something for the Patreon boys, or the co-main event. Actually, if it's really good, I'll write something for the Patreon boys. Otherwise, if you want to get in on the Patreon, support the podcast, check out the cool stuff we do, sign up to Patreon. Make sure to check out the Filthy Casuals guide to Adesanya versus Costa, which is on my YouTube channel. And subscribe and click the bell and smash the like, but mainly subscribe and click the bell. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Sajara Eubanks face turn bless.